Right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Abe Bonowitz. I'm the Executive Director of Death Penalty Action. And we're pleased to host this press conference about Anthony Wainwright and the upcoming execution scheduled for June 10th. We've got a number of guests here. So before I hand that over to Grace, I'm going to share in the chat. I'll just share with you that while others are speaking, we'll be sharing in the chat some resources, including the petition that we have at Death Penalty Action, and there's a similar petition at Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. We're all in partnership together. As well, I want you to know that we'll be getting back with you about the precise time, I should say, for the petition delivery, by which time we should have thousands of signatures to be delivered to Governor DeSantis on June 9th. As well, we'll be filling up the, or rather keeping the phones ringing in that office that week, and people will be calling sporadically throughout the next couple of weeks, simply to maintain our opposition to this and every execution. In addition to that, we are calling on communities of faith that have bells to toll their bells at the time of the execution, just as we do outside the prison, under the leadership of Our Lady of Lourdes, the Catholic Church that is always there present outside the prison in Florida at executions, and other activities as are organized through over the next couple of weeks. Death Penalty Action and all of us oppose every execution. They're all a political circus, and all of them should stop. And with that, I want to introduce Grace Hanna, who is on the board of directors of Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Also, you all have permission to record, as if that needed to be said.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining today. Like Abe said, my name is Grace Hanna, and I am the secretary of the board of directors of Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, and I will drop that in the chat. Before we get started talking about Mr. Wainwright, I kind of want to situate this conversation in Florida's broader death penalty scheme. I think executions in Florida have become quite common, and so we have at times backed away from talking about the numbers of them and the reality of them. But since the death penalty was reinstated in the late 70s, Florida has executed 111 people. 6 of those were in 2023, 1 in 2024, and this year we are now on number 6 with Mr. Wainwright. Florida has the broadest capital punishment statutes of any state in the nation. We are one of 2 states that allows an individual to be sentenced to death by a non-unanimous jury. The only other that allows that is Alabama, and they require 10 of 12 jurors to vote for death. In Florida, only 8 out of 10 are required. And this was implemented in the wake of the Parkland shooting, when the jury listened to all of the evidence and failed to return a death sentence for the defendant in that case. This year, the Florida legislature has been attempting to further expand the death penalty by passing several laws, adding additional aggravating factors, and also adding a provision to the broader corrections bill stating that if the drugs for lethal injection were no longer available, they would use, quote, any constitutional method of execution. This is notable because no method of execution has ever been found unconstitutional, and really opens the door for free will and whatever they decide to do to carry out these executions. At FADP, we oppose every execution. We also provide support to the families of the individuals being executed and on death row, as well as to the family of the victims. I myself am a victim's family member of someone who was murdered. And I think that providing compassion and thoughtfulness to all individuals involved in this process is important, because an execution is emotionally grueling, even if you're the victim's family member, even if you've been told that it is to bring you justice. And so with that, I am going to pass off to the Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood. He is a Catholic priest, is a nationally recognized as both an activist and a theologian, particularly in his work with people facing execution. And he is the personal spiritual advisor to Mr. Anthony Wainwright, who is scheduled for execution next month.
Thank you so much, Grace. I think that it's always puzzling to me when we come to moments like this. It's puzzling because it seems to me that we should be running, sprinting, charging away from killing people instead of running, charging, sprinting headlong into another execution. I wanted to begin by relaying some of my personal experiences with Anthony. We met 3 years ago. His wife, Sam, reached out to me and wanted us to connect. We connected and we have had a spiritual relationship. I've been his spiritual advisor for 3 years now. I can tell you that each time I talk to Anthony, I feel like he's grown a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Thus is the problem with the death penalty. It doesn't matter how long or how far or how wide you grow, the state is still determined to kill you. I can tell you that I have seen Anthony develop from a relatively closed person to a person who is an incredible husband, an incredible stepfather, and soon to be an incredible grandfather. If this execution goes forward on June the 10th, he won't get to see that grandfather moment. I also want to say that Anthony is an incredibly curious person. And we've had a lot of very interesting conversations, not the least of which has been about this crime, about what happened, where he was at, his mindset, all of these different factors that make up a tragedy like this. The more we've talked, the more it's been clear that he has grown tremendously from that moment. I also have appreciated his faith. Anthony is someone who has faith like a child. He just simply wants to believe. He's asked me over and over again about the goodness of people. I want you to think about trying to talk to someone about the goodness and love of people when people are trying to kill you. Trying to explain the goodness and love of people when they're preparing the execution chamber for you. I've also had conversations with him about his deeds. Again, what he has done, his part in all of this. I think it's so important in these moments to say, we're not here to completely wipe away or wash away that which has been done. We are here to speak to the totality of who this man is. Gosh, he is so much more than a monster. Surely we are all much more than the worst things that we have ever done. I also wanted to speak to the family of Carmen Gayhart. I know that we are all in prayer for this other family, this other group of people who are facing tremendous difficulties and who have faced tremendous tragedy. Anthony has shown incredible remorse for even the small role that he has played. I also want to speak to the fact that Anthony played a small role in this situation, a secondary role. We know this because of a lot of the filings, and I'll point you to those filings to take a look. But I just want to also say that we are talking about someone who, quite frankly, has never killed anyone, has never sexually assaulted anyone. Again, I point you to the filings to speak to those things. Hold on, got a dog on the loose. Charles, sorry. I point you to the filings there, but I also, I don't want to speak a whole lot of legalese. I'm not a lawyer. Nobody on this call is a lawyer, but I do want to say that I am a priest. And I have had conversation after conversation, moments of confession, moments of spiritual conversation, moments in which Anthony has repeatedly described various moments throughout his life, including this one. And I can tell you that if he was a primary actor in this situation, I have no doubt that I would know. He was not. Lastly, I want to appeal to Floridians. We don't have to keep doing this. We don't have to keep doing this. Anthony Wainwright is not hurting anyone and cannot hurt anyone. Anthony Wainwright has grown. Of course, nobody gets to see that part. And I think that's why we're here, is that we want people to see that part. Lastly, I want to speak directly to those who call themselves Christians. The message of Jesus is very clear. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. You can't love your neighbor and kill them at the same time. You can't love Anthony Wainwright, who, by the way, is your neighbor, and kill him at the same time. I hope that Florida will put down the needle, put down the executioner's mask, put down all of these devices that push us to thinking that we are somehow better than someone else, that we can somehow kill someone else, judge someone else, murder someone else. Lastly, I just want to, from a deeply personal place, I ask people to pray. Pray for the Gayhart family. Pray for Anthony Wainwright. Pray that we can find a way that's better than this. Because I do believe that we are better than this. I think we're going to open it up now to questions. If anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in.
If you raise your hand or indicate in the chat or the Q&A, we'll be happy to take your questions. If you raise your hand, I'll invite you to speak. Mr. Anderson. Let's see. There we go. Go ahead, sir.
Why do you think I've covered all 5 of these executions so far in Florida this year? We're only almost to the 6th month. We have another one here, so it's 6 in 6 months. Why do you think the pace is? I'll open this anyone that wants to speak. Why do you think the pace has gone up so much?
Grace, can you go first?
Or Bridget?
Yeah, absolutely. And and my colleague Bridget as well, I can defer to. I think that it's beyond any of us to say specifically why. I think that We do know that in many states, there have been issues with obtaining access to the drugs used in lethal execution. And while Florida has a shield law, so we don't know the quantities that they have on hand, but that is certainly a possibility. I think another possibility is when you look at the timing of the executions, the last time we had kind of a spate of executions in a row was during the governor's presidential campaign. And now as we're gearing up for another gubernatorial election, I think that it's impossible to look at these situations without that context, whether or not it's truly related. I think also in this case, there have been several of these cases were perhaps triggered by the Parkland shooting and the non-unanimous sentence in that case that led to Nicholas Cruz receiving a life sentence. And I think that brought renewed attention to the death penalty and almost brought the governor's attention back to it. In Florida, only the governor can set an execution date. He has kind of unique ability to decide who gets executed and when. And so I can't speak to what's on his mind or in his heart. And if Bridget, if you have anything to add.
Sure. My name is Bridget Maloney. I'm Communications Director for Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. I would just add that we had the longest period of no executions under Governor DeSantis from 2019 to 2023. And obviously there was a very large uptick in 2023 immediately after changing the unanimity law in sentencing to non-unanimous juries. So we had a break, the longest break in Florida's history. And then this year we've seen 5. The record in Florida for most executions in a year was set by Rick Scott. That is 8. So I won't say that is what the path that we're on, because I can't be in the governor's head, though it does seem like we are on track to beat that record, which would make the largest number of executions in Florida history in 1 year. But what I think is most important to recognize is that the largest or longest moratorium, quote unquote, in Florida's history has been under Governor DeSantis.
I would just add, if I may, a Bonowitz death penalty action. We've seen now Governor DeSantis is apparently running around the country as part of this cabal of red state governors and attorneys general that are trying to find ways to expand the death penalty. And they're all just sort of goose stepping in the wake of the executive order from President Trump to expand the use of the death penalty for the Department of Justice to enable the use of the death penalty. I don't think Florida needs any help, but when you see other states resuming executions, and especially, and we just saw Pennsylvania introduce similar legislation to the child molestation bill that not exactly sure what they called it in Florida, but Florida passed legislation to allow the death penalty for non-homicides that impact that are for people who are abusing children. And such legislation is also now passed in Tennessee and Idaho, and they're trying to push that. They're pushing expansion of different methods of execution, and Governor DeSantis is trying to lead that. I will also offer that it was very curious when Governor DeSantis was running for the presidency. We saw him resume executions and carry them out with the same sort of, actually a little bit slower, but a similar regularity. And then that stopped when he withdrew from the presidential race, even though there are dozens and dozens of people on Florida's death row who have exhausted their appeals and are eligible for a death warrant. So these are curiosities. And I think at the end of the day, it is simply part of the MAGA agenda to increase and resume executions, increase them in states that are using them, resume them in states that haven't in a while. And the sad fact about that is that what we know is that executions don't do anything to protect anybody. They just prolong the pain of everybody involved, including the victims' families. And this idea that you'll get healing from an execution decades from the time the person is convicted. And as we just saw in Indiana, which had its second execution in 15 years, just this past Monday night, early Tuesday morning, Indiana has executed a man who killed a police officer. And what we know from the statistics from the Officer Down Memorial webpage, that you are more at risk as a law enforcement officer in a state that has the death penalty, and even more so in a state that uses execution. So when they say executions are for a deterrent and for the victim families, that is purely political bluster, because the fact is that violent crime and murder is more frequent in states that have a death penalty, and more frequent, even more frequent in states that have the death penalty and use it. And that bears out. That's the FBI crime statistics for the broader community, and you can do the numbers yourself using the facts on the Officer Down Memorial webpage about how officers are killed or have died in the line of duty. And again, the more the use of the death penalty, the greater the risk there is for people to be murdered. Jeff?
Yeah, I just Mr. Anderson wanted to jump in real quick, and I guess I was going to give a theological answer, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I was just going to say that I think we're morally very confused as a society. We say that we want healing and growth, and then we do things like this to circumvent healing and growth. We say that we want a society that is just, and we have all of these processes with our criminal justice system, not just in terms of executions that are so unjust. And lastly, I mean, it's particularly bizarre for me that the people who are claiming to morally lead the way, i.e., my fellow followers of Jesus and Christians, are often the ones that support the most confusing pathways. And so I don't think, not to run too counter to Abe, but I'm not sure that the problem is MAGA or Trump or conservative or Governor DeSantis. I mean, I think the problem is us. We are a morally confused people. And I think that if we get to a place where we will have real conversations about how to love our neighbors, be good neighbors, live the good life, or live the life that is meaningful, then it seems like we'll have a more meaningful, just, loving, neighborly society.
Thank you. And I don't disagree with Jeff. Other questions? Let's see. Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Well, so we have the death penalty in certain states. This gentleman, Mr. Wainwright, and again, I've covered the last 5. So each of the crimes are pretty terrible if they're actually guilty, which our system has judged it that way. Why, if you have the death penalty, why don't they deserve it? And this is a big question. So, and I don't want to get into too much of that, but maybe just in terms of Reverend Hood, you mentioned you've gotten to know him a little bit. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, obviously, this is a question I could spend the rest of the afternoon talking about.
I understand.
But Mr. When I keep saying Mr. Anderson, I can't help but think about the Matrix. I'm sorry, but I keep on thinking about the Matrix. So I was going to say, though, that, if Anthony is executed, he will be the 10th person that I have, been in the chamber for to see them executed. 9 different lives snuffed out. I have never talked to anyone who walks out of that room and says, wow, we are so much better now that this has happened.
Yeah, it's one of the saddest things I ever do. And it weighs on me too, just like anyone else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's horrible. I mean, Mr. Anderson, you probably know the
You can call me Kurt, by the way.
okay, Kurt, sorry. That'll help my concentration.
No,
Uh,
no problem.
well, Kurt, I think that one of the things that that sort of pops into my mind too is this idea of moral injury. I don't know, I mean, you can Google it, but it's sort of a psychological, theological phrasing or term, and basically it talks about the moral injuries that we are inflicting on the people that we expect to do these jobs and carry these things out. And folks like yourself, who, you're here just trying to do your job, you're trying to report on this execution, but you're left with tremendous trauma in the process.
Well, if I
And
may just interject on that, what happens, we AP Associated Press, that's who I work for. We have a standing witness spot in all the states that have executions, including Florida, and so it's been me for these ones. And you're exactly right. But also, what I have to do is go back into the court record and all the things and dredge up the everything that happened, and put that on the wire, as we say. It's not, it's. I was telling people I used to cover. I'm sorry, I don't mean to. I'm now talking more than you guys, but I
no,
used to
please.
cover.
we're
I
enjoying
used
it.
to cover. I used to cover the courts in Miami for 15 years, and I've actually the trials are worse than the executions because you get all the horrible evidence of things. It does, but back to your point, Reverend Hood, it is a moral injury. Yeah, and I don't know if I'll ever get past it totally. So
Right.
that's all.
I
So I
wanted
guess I'm.
I
Go
wanted
ahead.
to answer your original question though about these crimes. You know, far be it from me to criticize the wider abolition movement, but I think one of the difficulties that we are consistently seeing from advocates is they want to minimize crimes. If nothing else, like push it to the side. Let's not talk about this. Let's talk about the present. I mean, I think if we're going to have a real conversation about the death penalty, the victims have to matter just as much as the condemned. And I think there's probably folks on the other end of things who say, well, the condemned shouldn't matter at all. But I don't see how we become the society that I think we all want to be if we create lesser human beings. When we create lesser human beings, we're creating a chaos, a moral chaos. And so I think that, Kurt, I think that what I would say is, I mean, I too become intimately connected to these cases. And it's not just because I, see it in the news or anything like that, but I'm kind of like you. I don't feel like I can minister to my guys in a legitimate and full way without knowing what all of this case law and what all of these cases say. And I do my absolute damnedest to be as present as I possibly can for my entire relationship with the person who is facing execution. The difficulty, um, of course, is that we weren't there. I mean, there are things that we know, there are things that we don't know. I mean, as I hate to borrow from Donald Rumsfeld, but there are known knowns and what is it, unknown knowns and known something else. But the point being that we are constantly pushed into this place where certainty is demanded of us. And Kurt, I'm sure that this is the story of your life, but certainty is demanded of us, and sometimes certainty is impossible. So what I have found is that it is my job to love these guys. I've worked with two women, so guys and gals. It is my job to love these folks where they are. And certainly, I mean, surely that's all any of us can do, is to love people where they are. Because we can't go back in time, we can't change things, but we can change our future. We can change what we are becoming what we want to be. And I just can't fathom that we want more killings, which is all that we're doing when we perpetuate these executions.
Grace?
Yeah, just briefly before we wrap, I know we're at time, but just speaking from the perspective of a victim's family member, and having had a loved one who was murdered, and going through the process of the trial and sentencing, I really relate strongly to Attorney Brian Stevenson's words of I'm gonna misquote here. I can put it in the chat afterwards, but it's not that I believe that no one deserves to die. It's that I believe that we do not deserve to kill. I think that the death penalty damages everyone who is involved, and these long, protracted cases damage everyone who's involved. I think that when you sentence someone to life in prison, the case is closed and it's over, and everyone is able to begin healing. The death penalty promises the victim's family members that they'll have healing at this unknown date in the future when an execution takes place. And that is often 10, not even 10, really 15, 20, 30, even more years down the road from when the trial was taking place. And I think it's really cruel to promise someone that their healing is only going to happen.
And Grace, I just want to say, every time I've been out there at that prison and the family members come out, that's exactly what they say. It's taken too long. It's been terrible to have to go through this. We have all these hearings. The Parkland shooter was sentenced to life in prison. He was only 22, I think, when he got, so he's going to be there a long time. And that may be, I'm just saying, I'm a reporter, so I'm not supposed to have opinions, but that may be the better way, but what do I know? So.
I don't disagree. And my personal stances on life without parole are fully separate, but I think that we're selling a bill of goods with the death penalty that is really difficult for us to actually carry out, particularly in Florida, where we have more death row exonerations than any other state in the country. Either 30 or 31 people who have quite literally been convicted, found guilty or pleaded guilty, and sentenced to death by a jury of their peers who later were released because either they were actually innocent or the courts made errors. And that, to me, is just far too high of a risk to speed up the process any further. I mean, 30 people is phenomenal. Out of 195 in the country, 30 of them have been in Florida.
Well, your point is right, because if you speed it up and you still have the death penalty, that means there's a lot of things that might go overlooked or whatever. And so why have the death penalty? Anyway.
No, that's exactly right.
I wanted to quickly add,
Jeff, if I may, there is a couple of things. One is I just want to state for the record that each of us is speaking for our own organizations. Also, maybe not all death penalty opponents just try to elevate also the fact that there are victims in these cases. I know that in Florida, FADP and Death Penalty Action always lift up and remember the victims as well as the person that's being executed. But then it becomes that's part of the problems with the death penalty. When there is an execution, the person being executed becomes the most famous person in the world for that day. And few people can name any of the victims in any of these cases. And to the point, and to your question, well, two things, Kurt. One is I will send you a link to a conversation that we hosted a couple of years ago with a number of journalists who have witnessed execution, talking about how they're dealing with that, because it is a traumatization, not just for you, but everybody that's involved in that process. The other thing is, with regard to why are we having all these executions, my question is why this one and not all these others? And what I mean by that is, there are thousands of murders that have taken place since Florida has had a death penalty. And Florida was the first state to reinstate the death penalty. It had a special session of the legislature in November of 1972 after the U.S. Supreme Court struck down all the death penalty laws on July 29th, 1972. And since then, there have been, I don't know how many thousands of murders, but of all those where they actually caught somebody, which is not all the time, where the case was death eligible, which is not all the time, where they actually sought a death sentence, which is not all the time, where they actually won a death sentence and a conviction, which is not all the time, where the death sentence has actually been upheld all the way to the point of the person either dying on death row, which just happened again with Brandy Jennings, died over Saturday night of cancer without proper pain medication, by the way, on death row. But where they get to the point where they get to the point of a person being executed, that's fewer than 1% of all the death eligible people on a nationwide basis. Fewer than 1% of all the people who are death eligible getting to the point of execution. And if the death penalty is for the victim family members, as they say, what we're really saying, what Governor DeSantis and all of them before Jeb Bush and on, and even before him, what they're really saying to the vast majority of victim family members is your loved one wasn't valuable enough. And one of the arguments that we make is that they should be taking all these resources that are wasted in the cases where they seek a death sentence and don't get it, or they get it and it's overturned and not given again. All those resources are wasted when instead they could be put into better services for victim families across the board. And it shouldn't matter what county you're in. If your loved one was murdered, you should be getting a certain set of resources to help you begin a process of moving forward, of healing. We're never going to get our loved ones back ever, but we don't have to then be forced to wait decades to begin a healing process. It's actually a blessing in disguise if you don't get a death sentence in your case.
Kurt, I had two thoughts, or one thought, and then I wanted to bring in a surprise guest. One is that juries and judges are so far removed from these actual executions. One of the things that I've thought about often is if a jury had to carry out an execution themselves, we wouldn't have a death penalty. If a judge had to carry out an execution themselves, we wouldn't have a death penalty. I think that if a jury had to watch these executions, we wouldn't have a death penalty. I would even venture to say the same for judges. I mean, the amount of distance removed from the sentence to the actual carrying out of the sentence is unbelievable. Also, I wanted to bring in very quickly Noah Dubois, who is one of my dear friends, and just by way of explanation, Noah's husband, Stephen, was executed in the state of Texas back in February, and I was Stephen's spiritual advisor, and now Noah and I work together.
Yeah, just quickly, thank you, Jeff, for the introduction. I don't want to paraphrase. We already took, enough time. Kurt, like you and I, not you per se, but like we have been in that same, room when we watched the execution. Like I was there for my husband. And I just wanted to, kind of say that, like, to answer your question, when you were asking, do they deserve it? I feel that, like, most of the time, we people who go watch this, and I know you have to, keep that neutral stance because you're a reporter. Sometimes maybe, the issue is that you have to say, do they deserve it, to kind of make it, easier to go through what you're seeing and witnessing at that point, and to kind of like fade the little trauma that you probably endure going to witness every one of those executions.
Well, Noah, we can have a little dialogue about this. I have to have a little bit of remove. I can't get too bound up in the emotion of it, because otherwise, if I do that, then it's going to be very difficult for me to be impassionate about it, and and then having to force myself to do it. I guess it's like a therapy session.
No, absolutely.
But having to force
and that's
myself.
why I think
But having to force myself to do that, it sort of takes away a little bit, because it's horrible. It is. There's no question.
Yeah.
Every time I drive up to Stark in North Florida, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. I sort of dread it, And so anyway, it's but yet I recognize the crimes are terrible. I have to give the victims their say. There's not one of them that I've covered that I thought was innocent. If I did, that would be a whole nother deal. But anyway, so go ahead. I'm sorry. I just you're right though. It's
No, I
not
think
easy
it's
to do
like
this.
you answered your own question, like when you're like, does I deserve it? Because exactly what you said, you need to, remove yourself from that situation emotionally. Um, and I think that kind of like answer your own question.
Thank you, Kurt.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, thanks, guys.
Just
I have
before
not. I am not. I just want to say I am not going to cover this execution. I have a family conflict, thankfully in a way. So another reporter is going to, AP reporter will be there, and I'm going to give her some notes from this communication we just had.
And
So-
you can also watch or give her a link to this live stream, and I'll send that to you as well. Are there any
That'd be
other
good.
reporters that have? Because I think actually this has been a fascinating conversation, and maybe there's a story here for you, Kurt. That's as an aside, a sidebar or some other piece of the puzzle. In any case, we'll follow up. Does anybody else have any questions for our panel? And Bridget, did you want to add something?
No, that was a lovely discussion. I'm just really grateful to have everybody asking these very important questions and having these important conversations. I wish that there would be many, many more of them. So I'm very grateful that we're having this conversation.
Okay. So you have people's contact information in the chat. And of course, we're happy to connect you with anybody. With any of the people, if you need this, you can just reach me at ABE at deathpenaltyaction.org. Or if you got the press release, Blair Fitzgibbon is our publicist, and he'd be happy to make the connection as well. So last call for any questions from any of the other journalists with us. All right. Well, then, thank you all very much for participating, and we hope you all have a restful weekend. And we're grateful that just hours ago we have a third execution this week, so we're all ready for a break. There won't be any more executions in the United States until the 2 that are scheduled on June 10th, which, by the way, Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood is also the spiritual advisor to Gregory Hunt, who's being killed an hour later in Alabama. So we'll be focusing on that as well. So with that, thank you all for being here with us today.
Appreciate your time.